Good morning. I've been doing a lot of exploration in and around the Owens Valley in California lately. It reminds me so much of times when we were kids. We would travel up and down Highway 395 numerous times, mainly to go camping in the eastern Sierras with my dad. Many places we passed up, and I've gone back and done some exploring in some of these areas. And another area that we passed up a number of times is Manzanar. It was a Japanese internment camp during World War II. Passed it by a number of times but never stopped in. So I'm going to go check it out. Come along and travel with me. Let's go to Manzanar. I got my travel coffee and ready to hit the road. Let me start this discussion by giving you a little bit of background of Manzanar. Manzanar was first inhabited by indigenous peoples nearly 10,000 years ago. Approximately 1,500 years ago, the area was settled by the Owens Valley Paiute, who ranged across the Owens Valley from Long Valley on the north to Owens Lake on the south. When European American settlers first arrived in the Owens Valley in the mid-19th century, they found a number of large Paiute villages in the Manzanar area. John Shepard, one of the first of the new settlers, homesteaded 160 acres. With the help of Owens Valley Paiute field workers and laborers, he expanded his ranch to 2,000 acres. In 1905, George Chafee, an agricultural developer from Southern California, purchased Shepard's ranch and subdivided it along with other adjacent ranches. He founded the town of Manzanar in 1910, along the main line of the Southern Pacific Railroad. By August 1911, the town's population was approaching 200. The company built an irrigation system over an area of 1,000 acres and planted about 20,000 fruit trees. By 1920, the town had more than 25 homes, a 2-room school, a town hall, and a general store. Also at that time, nearly 5,000 acres of apple, pear, and peach trees were under cultivation, along with crops of grapes, prunes, potatoes, corn, and alfalfa, and large vegetable and flower gardens. As early as March of 1905, the city of Los Angeles began acquiring water rights in the Owens Valley. In 1913, it completed construction of its 233-mile long Los Angeles aqueduct. In dry years, Los Angeles pumped groundwater and drained all surface water, diverting all of it into its aqueduct and leaving Owens Valley ranchers without water. Without water for irrigation, the holdout ranchers were forced off their ranches and out of their communities. That included the town of Manzanar, which was abandoned by 1929. Manzanar remained uninhabited until the United States Army leased 6,200 acres from the city of Los Angeles for the Manzanar War Relocation Center. Today, the decision to intern Japanese Americans is widely viewed by historians and legal scholars as a blemish on Roosevelt's wartime record. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the FBI arrested over 1,200 Japanese aliens throughout the United States. Over the next several weeks, President Roosevelt received contradictory advice about further action. FDR's military advisors recommended the exclusion of persons of foreign descent, including American citizens, from sensitive areas of the country as safeguard against espionage and sabotage. The Justice Department initially resisted any relocation order, questioning both its military necessity and its constitutionality. But the shock of Pearl Harbor and of Japanese atrocities in the Philippines fueled already tense race relations on America's West Coast. In the face of political, military, and public pressure, Roosevelt accepted the relocation proposal. The Attorney General acquiesced after the War Department relieved the Justice Department of any responsibility or implementation. And on February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed an executive order granting the War Department broad powers to create military exclusion areas. Although the order did not identify any particular group, in practice it was used almost exclusively to intern Americans of Japanese descent. By 1943, more than 110,000 Japanese Americans had been forced from their homes and moved to camps in remote inland areas of the United States. Manzanar certainly was a remote location in the Owens Valley. You can see it highlighted here in relationship to some of the known areas of Eastern California. The Manzanar War Relocation Center was one of 10 permanent centers at which Japanese Americans were confined during World War II. After an initial effort aimed at voluntary relocation proved to be unworkable, the U.S. Army began to remove persons of Japanese descent and relocate them to temporary assembly centers and then on to the relocation camps. These camps were located in desolate areas in 7 states: Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. In total, some 117,000 persons of Japanese descent were excluded and removed and detained as a result of this policy. Manzanar was the first of the permanent Japanese American relocation centers to open, receiving its first evacuees on March 21, 1942. The Manzanar camp was established initially by the U.S. Army as an assembly or reception center and managed by Wartime Civil Control Administration as the Owens Valley Reception Center from March 21 through May 31, 1942. On June 1, 1942, Manzanar was transferred to the War Relocation Authority and renamed Manzanar War Relocation Center. The relocation camps were selected based upon 4 criteria. Number 1, it was necessary to find places with some adoptable pre-existing facilities suitable for the establishment of shelter and many needed community services. Second, power, light, and water had to be within immediate availability. Third, the transportation, road, and rail network had to be good. And finally, it was essential that there be some area within the enclosure for recreation, as the necessary confinement would otherwise have been completely demoralizing. Less than 1 week after construction began, the first Japanese American evacuees arrived at Manzanar, which the military continued to call the Owens Valley Reception Center, on March 21, 1942, as part of the Western Defense Command's voluntary evacuation program. In a report printed in the Manzanar Free Press, it is described that the first arrivals at Manzanar on March 21, 1942, first 84 volunteers arrived by bus. The next day, 6 more came by private car. The following day, March 23rd, 710 arrived in a caravan of private cars escorted by the Army. Once the cars arrived at the Manzanar site, they were impounded. Construction of the general utilities began in March of 1942, and the blocks 29 through 36 were the last blocks to be completed and were open to evacuees for occupancy during mid-June of 1942. As with any development that has residences, the first and foremost infrastructure that needs to be installed is sewer and water. Initially, the water supply for the Manzanar camp was provided on a temporary basis by a water tank that had a capacity of 98,000 gallons. This was emptied an average of 15 times each 24-hour period. Because of the inadequacies of this system, construction was begun on a new concrete basin reservoir located northwest of the camp along Shepherd Creek in May of 1942. The permanent water supply system for Manzanar was completed in July of 1942. This new concrete reservoir had a capacity of 800,000 gallons. When the new water system was complete, it provided a daily supply of 1.5 million gallons of water from Shepherd Creek to the camp. The sewage disposal system at Manzanar consisted of a collection system, an outfall system, and a sewage treatment plant. It was considered one of the most modern systems of its time in California, and the system cost somewhere around $150,000 to construct. That equates to about $3 million in today's dollars. This is a complete site plan of the Manzanar War Relocation Center. Shows all the facilities on the site. As I investigate each of these areas, I'll be making reference back to this site plan from time to time. This exhibit is showing the detail of each of the blocks. Buildings were grouped in a uniform block arrangement. Each block consisted of 15 barracks, a mess hall, and each block had 2 latrines, one for men and one for women, a laundry room, and an ironing room between the rows. The oil tank shown at the top was put there for fuel oil. It was used to provide heat source for the barracks and also cooking for the mess hall. The gymnasium was completed on September 30, 1944. Only a few months later, January 2, 1945, the West Coast exclusion order is lifted and Japanese Americans can return to their former communities. On November 21, 1945, the Manzanar internment camp closes permanently. Bounded by a barbed wire fence and guarded by armed MPs, people in Manzanar face constant reminders of their loss of freedom. The military police guarding the perimeter of the assembly centers aroused substantial concern among the evacuees. Armed with machine guns, they appeared menacing. The fences, the military police, the searchlights, and the watchtowers of the centers created a good deal of ill feeling among the people. Resentment was high, and in spite of the publicity efforts stating these were not concentration camps, the presence of these fences made this assertion unconvincing. On December 6, 1942, the U.S. Army Military Police and the incarcerated Japanese Americans had a fatal confrontation. The episode was triggered by Manzanar administrator's arrest of Harry Ueno for his alleged role in the beating of a Japanese American Citizens League leader, Fred Tayama, the night before. Claiming that Ueno had been wrongly accused, hundreds of Japanese Americans protested during the day on December 6th. That demonstration ended peacefully. At nightfall, about 500 people returned to demand Ueno's release. They faced off against MPs near the Manzanar police station. 2 MP soldiers fired into the crowd, killing 2 and wounding others. It was the U.S. Army's first use of deadly force against incarcerated Japanese Americans during World War II. In the aftermath, when the dust had settled, one young man, 17-year-old James Ito of Los Angeles, had been killed by the gunfire. Another, 21-year-old Jim Kanagawa of Tacoma, would die of his injuries several days later. 9 others were shot but survived. On January 2nd, 1945, the West Coast exclusion order is lifted and Japanese Americans can return to their former communities. By February 1 in 1945, mess halls begin closing as the camp population drops. 7 mess halls are closed by the end of the month. On May 29, 1945, the Manzanar Elementary School and high school classes meet for the last time. On November 21, 1945, the last internee, a 4-year-old boy, leaves Manzanar at 11 a.m. Manzanar is permanently closed. The World War II exclusion of Japanese Americans lasted from 1942 to 1945. Nearly 40 years later, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians concluded Executive Order 9066 was not justified by military necessity. The broad historic causes that shaped these decisions were race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. At the heart of this experience lies the U.S. Constitution and the rights and protections it promises all Americans. In 1988, Congress passed and President Reagan signed a public law, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, that acknowledged the injustice of internment, apologized for it, and provided a $20,000 cash payment to each person who was incarcerated. Manzanar was declared a National Historic Site in 1992. As I stated earlier in this video, we used to pass by Manzanar all the time, either on the way home or on the way to fishing expeditions along the 395 corridor. And at that time, the only thing you can really see of evidence of Manzanar was the sentry guardhouse. Outside of that, there wasn't much to see at all. You wouldn't be able to find your way around without interpretation. Since Manzanar became a National Historic Site in 1992, the National Park Service has done a wonderful job about recreating and cleaning up and providing a beautiful visitor center in the old gymnasium. There is a fantastic self-guided driving tour around the site. Highly recommend it. Let's begin our driving tour around the site, see what we can find. These stone sentry posts were constructed by a Japanese stonemason, Ryozo Kato, in 1942. This photo depicts the main street once you get beyond the sentry stations. The white buildings on the street's south side included the War Relocation Authority offices, staff housing, as well as a town hall, and it was also the site of the main post office. And on the north side, the right side of the street, black tar papered barracks housed the police station, the Manzanar Free Press newspaper office, and other camp functions and services. These photos are showing the approximate outline of the police station and where the Manzanar riot took place. This is the cul-de-sac and the location of where the administrative centers are. You can see the cul-de-sac and what it looks like today. These are the rock and concrete foundations of the administrative area, which included the administrative buildings and the staff housing. As you can see here, these were a little bit more of a permanent building. These are the concrete slab and rock walls of an apartment building for the administration staff. This is what a typical block would be looking like. You can see the concrete foundations for the pedestals that they had and a couple of the recreated buildings. The Japanese referred to these blocks as the tar paper city. The green lumber that was used for the buildings shrank quickly in the dry air, creating gaps and knotholes. With below freezing temperatures, early arrivals had no heaters, nor was there the protection from the severe dust storms which came pouring through the openings in the eaves, the wide cracks in the floors, and by night sleepers could gaze up at the stars through the knotholes in the slits in the wood roof. And this is a typical women's latrine in each of the blocks. They say that this arrangement for the toilets was very humiliating, and later on they did put partitions, blanket partitions up between the toilets. They say the shower rooms weren't much better. They were housed in one large area. Within the camp, there was certainly some form of recreation. You can see that by these photos of the basketball court. This Ford flatbed truck was parked right outside the mess hall. It was probably used as a delivery vehicle. I found this display quite fascinating. It's a screen photo of the man standing in the doorway, much like the one that was taken back in the 1940s. A few photos of the mess hall now and back then. As time went on here at this camp, there was a few improvements that started to become a little bit more livable. This garden was one of them. This is all that's left of the hospital. You can see the rock foundation. You'll see a picture here that represented that back in the 1940s. The fire department and some of their training maneuvers. The fire station and the truck as it looks today. The lifeblood throughout the entire existence of Manzanar comes from Shepherd Creek. The creek is filled by the snow melt from the Sierras. In May of 1942, an Army contractor began construction on a reservoir that was fed by Shepherd Creek. The reservoir infrastructure included a settling basin, sand trap, chlorine house, and storage shed. And in 1943, Japanese-American crews enlarged the 540,000-gallon reservoir to a 900,000-gallon capacity. The reservoir provided a daily supply of up to 1.5 million gallons of water through 40,000 feet of pipes to faucets outside Manzanar's barracks and into the mess halls, latrines, and laundry rooms. The system also supplied 84 fire hydrants, victory gardens, and dozens of Japanese gardens. The camp closed in 1945. For decades after the war, Owens Valley locals came here to swim. Although no longer in use for water storage, the reservoir was an important part of Manzanar's history. A total of 146 internees died at Manzanar camp during its operation between 1942 and 1945. Most were cremated or sent to their hometowns elsewhere for burial. In 1943, the Manzanar internees decided to erect a monument to honor their dead. The monument was dedicated in August of 1943. According to Inyo County records, only 10 individuals are listed as being buried at the cemetery. By the time the Manzanar National Historic Site was established in 1992, it was not clear how many graves remained at the cemetery or exactly where they were located. As I understand, the inscription on the monument translates literally to Soul Consoling Tower. From 1942 to 1945, 8 U.S. Army guard towers watched over the 11,000 Japanese that were interned in Manzanar. This was a visual reminder that the people were not allowed to leave without permission.